Good evening and welcome back to CNN Money Switzerland. I'm Ana Maria Montero with your latest headlines this Wednesday. Lawmakers in the Swiss Parliament's lower house voted today in favor of a gradual reopening of the nation's borders, despite resistance from the Swiss People's Party. The Federal Council has already announced a gradual opening starting on May the 11th, when non-Swiss citizens will be allowed to rejoin their families in Switzerland, and entry for certain workers will also be relaxed. Speaking at the session in Parliament, Justice Minister Keller-Sutter said the government was working to coordinate easing measures with EU and Schengen countries. And as we prepare here in Switzerland for a continued reopening of businesses and schools next week, Germany is also softening their restrictions. Religious services resumed on Sunday, while many shops were able to reopen this week, and a further loosening of lockdown measures is expected today. However, Germany has prolonged border checks with Switzerland and other neighboring countries until the 15th of May to ensure further containment of the virus. In Spain, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez looks to secure enough parliamentary votes on Wednesday to extend a state of emergency for 2 more weeks, while UK leader Boris Johnson said the government's plan for moving forward will be presented to Parliament on Sunday, in the hopes that some new measure to ease the country's lockdown will be adopted the following day. The Eurozone economy will contract by a record 7.7% this year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the European Commission forecast on Wednesday. Paolo Gentiloni, European Commissioner for the Economy, said Europe is experiencing an economic shock without precedent since the Great Depression. Growth projections for the EU and Euro area have been revised down around 9 percentage points since its forecast last autumn. And the Swiss property market continued to steam ahead in the first quarter of the year, despite the spread of the coronavirus. According to UBS's latest real estate bubble index, the market entered what it labels as risk territory after prices rose 1.3%, the highest increase since 2014. The bank expects the impact of the crisis to start showing through in this quarter as rising unemployment and economic uncertainty dampen demand among would-be homebuyers. And the coronavirus pandemic has cost Expo Convention Center in Geneva millions of francs, as one event after another has been canceled or postponed, including the Geneva Motor Show. Chief Executive Claude Membres does not expect a turnaround before 2021. He spoke to my colleague, Olivia Chang.
Expo, it's an exhibition space which hosts watch fairs, and you've also got car shows. But for a venue that relies on having big events, how are you dealing with coronavirus when many of these are basically cancelled?
Well, as you know, the Swiss Federal Council decided to that events bigger than 1,000 people could not happen anymore. So since the beginning of March, we've been cancelling events and postponing events and dismantling the car show. So at the end of March, mid-March, everything was empty, and it's going to be empty for the next few weeks or months. So some shows are cancelled, others are postponed, and nowadays we are waiting for the regulations for reopening events. We've seen that in China or Asia in general, shows are reopening with security measures like temperature control, like announcements, like less people than X people in a hall or something. So we are working on this with our colleagues in Europe, and we hope that in autumn we will be ready to open shows again, or congresses or larger events, respecting the sanitary regulations.
Can you give me a clearer picture of how much business Expo is losing? How many events or how many participants and visitors are you forecasting for 2020 compared to all the other years?
Well, we don't really know what's going to happen in autumn, so that's going to be difficult to answer your question. But what I can tell you is that January, February, it was normal, like March, April, May, June, July, August, it's zero activity, zero turnover, zero people, nothing's happening. And then we hope that in September it's going to start again. So I cannot say that for the year 2020, but that's going to be terrible for us and for our financial results in 2020.
The Swiss government, as you've mentioned, they have banned big events over 1,000 people, and that's until the end of August. Right now, everything is a little bit uncertain about events in between. How much could you be losing in turnover by not having these really big events?
We speak about millions. So 1,000 million, 2,000 million, 3,000 million, it depends whether we are going to be able to carry on. The building is empty. People are home, so either they work a little bit or they do nothing, because when your job is to build the booth and then the building is empty, so you cannot build booths, so those people are doing nothing. Others like marketing, communication, finance, they have a few things to do, but not much. And so we are going to lose all this margin, and we are going to lose everything. And so a lot of million or dozen million in the year 2020.
Many events I've noticed have now been postponed until the end of the year. Are you expecting a full calendar at the end of 2020 and early 2021?
So we had that feeling in March. At the beginning of this funny story. So we thought that it might take a few weeks or months to recover. But today, beginning of May, I am not sure. So we see what's happening in Asia. We are quite confident because they can carry on. But I don't really know what's going to be happening in Europe. I'm a bit less confident about the end of the year. I'm more confident about next year because it's a bit further. But what's going to happen if we have a second wave? So I don't know.
How do you think coronavirus is going to change the exhibition and events space in the short and long term?
No one has the right answer. We can only guess what's going to be the future. In difficult times, and we've seen that in 2008 with the economic downturn, we could notice in the exhibition industry that strong events, like old events, like events taking place for many years for strong industries, were sustainable. And others, like younger events or events linked to an industry that is not really strong, disappeared in this economic downturn. So if we compare with the situation with the virus, we could imagine that strong events with a strong industry behind will be sustainable, even if they will need time to recover 100%. But I think that other events, weak industry, weaker events will unfortunately disappear.
As we become increasingly deglobalized, 3 of Switzerland's top investors give their views on the challenges and opportunities of a new world dynamic. For UBP's CIO Norman Villeman, the next frontier will be a war on capital. That's in a special debate hosted by my colleague, Hannah Wise.
Just the vulnerability of supply chains we've seen going back not only to the trade war, but also as a result of the virus. And then secondly, politically, as we enter election season in the United States, we think once again, the US-China dynamic is going to come on the radar, and that should continue to accelerate this deglobalization trend.
Well, certainly the US at first, even before coronavirus was upon us, was trying to split up or distance itself from China when it comes to supply chains. Do you think that we will now see more supply chains shift away from China? Esty, if I can put that to you.
I think different regions and different countries will try. I think there's, as Norman was saying, this vulnerability and this risk that if something like this happens again, or any different type of situation, that everyone is very dependent on China, and that wasn't a wonderful feeling. I think there's also just going to be a desire to repatriate strategic industries at home or closer to home. So whether it's healthcare, of course, but even defense, probably even some technology, having the ability to control it more and have it more at home, I think is a path. Now it's going to take time, but I think it's a path many regions are going to take.
Okay, so Dan, Esti outlining some of the sectors that might see this deglobalized future, but what are the geographical areas that may benefit?
Well, local supply chains or localization of supply chains is something that we've discussed before in the past. I think that trade wars is the obvious one that is going to force supply chains to localize. But the other element you should keep in mind is ESG, because does it really make sense that 80% of Amazon's goods for sale are made in China? Does it really make sense that, you know, parents sitting in California are buying their children a school backpack for $15 that then needs to travel through the Earth's atmosphere for 1,500 kilometers for a $15 product? It really doesn't make sense from an ESG perspective either. So it's not necessarily just trade wars. I think it's other dynamics that are going to accelerate now also with COVID, the idea that we should be nearer to our production, and new technological advances like through 3D printing are going to make localizing supply chains a lot easier.
And you can watch the rest of that debate online, cnnmoney.ch. Meanwhile, the Swiss government has allowed for some sports and sports training to return on May the 11th. But what does that look like for rugby, the ultimate contact sport? Well, Matt Layton caught up with Swiss Rugby CEO Veronika Mühlhofer to find out how to sidestep some of the restrictions to keep the sport moving forward in Switzerland.
Veronika, there is a return to play concept, so rugby can start in some form on the 11th of May. What have you put into place?
Yeah, we've had the advice of a lot of medical and sport technical experts, and they've helped us to put in place a 5-phase concept for rugby players and clubs to return to their activities, always within the given restrictions put in place by the government and the health ministries.
So this was something that all sports have had to do. I believe you've had some international recognition, and various rugby authorities are taking this as a plan.
Yeah, World Rugby as well as Rugby Europe have paid attention to our concept and have actually picked that up and displayed it on their website for a best practice. And also some international unions have contacted us to ask us if they can pick that up and adapt it for their own needs.
Rugby players out there in Switzerland, we have the elite, men, women, we have the youths, the schools. What's the news for them? Briefly, how is it going to roll forward in the next few weeks?
Well, the way the concept works is that in the first phase, the government has restricted the number of people that could assemble together to 5, and the social distance between people to 2 meters. And so within that framework, we're proposing certain activities that they can engage in. And as the government restrictions are lowered and as activities are broadened, then they can add to new phases in their training regime and all the way back to competitive play, we hope.
Well, there's a lot of clubs in Switzerland. Are they all going to survive? I know you're an amateur organization, but yes, the clubs, will they survive? And how are you doing financially as a federation?
Yeah, the financial challenges are big in this crisis, both at the club level, the regional level, and for the federation. Our main source of income, of course, is the domestic game, which has been completely halted in the lockdown. We are working together with all the stakeholders and appealing to their solidarity to help each other to survive this and to come out stronger out of this crisis.
And just how important is it on a social and a collective point of view that rugby and other sports really start coming together again?
Yeah, look, sport in general and rugby in particular will have an important role to play in coming out of the lockdown and of this crisis and in rebuilding society and social life. That's also why our return to play concept is giving our players, who are largely amateurs, who have families, who have jobs, who have lost jobs, it's really giving them a perspective and hope for a pathway forward out of this crisis.
And that's it for now. Don't forget, you can catch all of our content on our website, cnnmoney.ch, as well as our social media channels. As always, we are happy to hear from you. Take care. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.